Would you like to know how to tell a good story? Here's how. There's 5 parts to the narrative arc. The first part is the protagonist. The protagonist is a special character whose passion powers the story. All of the other characters in the story are not as important as the protagonist. Or protagonists, there can be more than one. The protagonist can be a hero or a villain and provides a spark of ignition for the story. We need to feel empathy about the protagonist. We need to care about them. We do that by throwing a messy situation at the protagonist that makes them off balance, which gives him or her the life force to pull their life back together. As long as we care about what happens to the protagonist, it doesn't matter if they're good or bad. We need to identify with the protagonist's voice. Motivation. The protagonist wants something badly enough to do things he or she wouldn't normally do. The motivation can be conscious or subconscious or both. It can serve the protagonist's best interests or bring them down. The protagonist is motivated to act. Ability. The protagonist needs to be able to fulfill their own desires. The potential to solve the conflict is within their ability. Then there is the spark, and the spark is what transforms a character into a protagonist. The spark is an unexpected event or series of events that throw the protagonist off balance and motivates him or her to act to rectify the imbalance. The spark is not a normal event. It could be some bad news, a routine that is central to the protagonist's life. It could be a comment from a stranger that sets off an emotional reaction, but it needs to be something out of the normal. The escalation is a series of complications that the protagonist runs into or creates in the pursuit of his or her goal and makes it even harder to solve the problem. It is best if there are at least 3 escalations in the story, problems that motivate the protagonist to solve them, which further complicate the situation. The climax will be the final escalation, where the protagonist either succeeds or fails at solving the original imbalance that shook up his or her life. The climax is the resolution or lack thereof of the problem. You may feel joy or regret, but you know the story is ending. The denouement is the last leg of the story arc. It ties up any loose ends in the story, and it is simple and short. To illustrate the narrative arc, I'm going to read you my favorite children's book so we can determine the elements of the narrative arc. This is a book called Plunk's Dreams by Helen V. Griffith with pictures by Susan Condi Lang. My dog dreams. I know he does because sometimes when he's lying on his side with his eyes tight shut, he shakes his paws and wiggles his nose and goes woof in a tiny voice. Then I say, Plunk is dreaming. And Dad says he thinks he's chasing rabbits. And Mom says he thinks he's getting dinner. But that's not what I think. I think Plunk is dreaming that he's an Indian dog, and he lives in the woods and travels in a canoe. And he stays outdoors all the time and explores, and he finds his own food and has a fire at night. And sometimes he sees wild animals, but he's not afraid. And then he wakes up. He'll think about how much fun he had, and he'll want to go camping somewhere for real, and I'd go too if somebody would take us. That's what I think. Sometimes when Plunk is asleep, he makes little yelps like this, yelp, yelp, yelp. And Dad says to me, Look, John, Plunk is chasing rabbits. And Mom says, Look, John, Plunk is dreaming of dinner. But that's not what I think. I think he's dreaming that a spaceship has landed in our yard and he's barking to warn us of danger and to scare away the aliens who are climbing out of the ship. But the aliens turn out to be dogs, just like Plunk, and they all talk together in dog language, and they invite Plunk to come and live on their planet, but Plunk says he'd rather live here. And then he wakes up. I'll give him some ice cream, and I'll probably have some too. That's what I think. Sometimes when Plunk is sleeping, he moves all 4 of his legs and he looks like he's running, only he's lying down. Dad says, chasing rabbits again. Mom says, running for his dinner. But that's not what I think. I think he's dreaming that he's chasing our cat because he's not allowed to when he's awake. He's chasing her through the house and through the yard and down the street, and while they're running, the cat gets bigger and bigger until she's bigger than Plunk. And all at once she turns around and starts to chase him. And he tries to run, but his paws keep sticking to the ground. And just as the cat reaches out her claws to grab him, he'll wake up. And when he does, he'll be scared because he won't be sure whether he was dreaming or not. And he'll have to sleep in his bed with me until he's not scared anymore. That's what I think. And then sometimes when Plunk is sleeping, his sides quiver and his tail goes flop, flop, flop against the floor and his lips wrinkle up so he looks like he's smiling. And Dad says, look, Plunk is dreaming about John. And Mom says, Plunk is dreaming about you, John. And that's what I think too. So let's go back and take a look at the narrative arc, and let's figure out how the story of Plunk's dreams fits into it. Who do you think is the protagonist or protagonists? What is the spark? Identify the 3 escalations in the story. Which part of the story is the climax? And which is the denouement? Post your answers in the narrative arc discussion board in our online class and look at other students' answers to compare and contrast your different opinions.